Peace means happiness. War means destruction, killing.
Tibet lies on the Tibetan Plateau with Himalaya, the highest chain of mountains as a natural border to the south and west. The average height in Tibet is more than 12,000 feet above sea level, and the country is often called the roof of the world. On most modern maps, Tibet isn't mentioned as an independent country, but merely as Tibet Autonomous Region, which is only half as big as the historical Tibet. According to the official Chinese policy, it's an autonomous region in China with a local government. About 2.5 million Tibetans live here, but the Tibetan population is actually between 5 and 6 million because the borders correspond to neither the historical borders nor the ethnic population. Tibet's history goes back thousands of years. In the 7th century, Buddhism came to Tibet from India and flourished under the protection of King Songtsen Gampo, who also established the Jokang Monastery, which still lies in the heart of Lhasa. The Buddhist philosophy of harmony and respect for all life became the foundation for the Tibetan society. At the same time, the monastic culture grew and became the central part of the country's religious and political structure. For about 300 years, the Dalai Lama has been the religious and political leader of the country. The Tibetans regard him as a living Buddha, a manifestation of Tibet's protector who lives in Patala in the center of the capital Lhasa. Tibet has always had close political ties with China and other neighbors, but in reality been a free and independent country. But in 1950, the Chinese People's Liberation Army invaded the mountain kingdom after highest orders by Chairman Mao. Mao and the Chinese Communist Party regarded Tibet as a backward region of China. In 1959, the Chinese occupation had created such a deep dissatisfaction among the Tibetans that a rebellion broke out in full force. The Tibetans feared for the Dalai Lama's life and surrounded his summer residence to prevent the Chinese from getting to him. The Dalai Lama escaped to India, where he and the 85,000 Tibetans who followed him were given asylum. Every year, the Dalai Lama spends 5 to 6 months traveling around the world to meet his people, speak to heads of governments and parliamentarians about Tibet, and give lectures about peace and the Buddhist view. No country in the world recognizes the Dalai Lama as a head of state, nor Tibet as an independent country. The Chinese government put heavy pressures on those countries the Dalai Lama visits and openly threaten with trade retaliations if the Dalai Lama is officially received. But despite the pressure, he has met with American presidents and English prime ministers. But just like the Danish government, they most often stress that the visit was of private nature. In 1989, the Dalai Lama received the Nobel Peace Prize. Besides representing his people and giving teachings on Tibetan Buddhism, he regards promotion of good human qualities and religious understanding as his main concerns.
I'm a Buddhist monk. In my mind, the dearest to my mind is Buddhist monk. At one indication, in my dream, often I remember I'm a monk, I'm a Buddhist monk. Almost none. In my dream, I feel I'm Dalai Lama.
Mit forhold til buddhismen, jeg har det sådan, at jeg løber sådan med dem på en vej, hvor vi i en lang stykke af vejen løber på samme asfalt, samme vejstykke. Og på et tidspunkt, så deler vejen sig op i sådan en gren. Og så løber vi faktisk parallelt et langt stykke hen ad vejen. Og nogle gange er vi længere fra hinanden, og nogle gange er vi kortere fra hinanden. Men det er jo sådan med buddhismen, at man aldrig helt taber dem af syne, og de aldrig helt taber også af syne.
Han er jo en fantastisk dialogpartner om de store spørgsmål her i livet. Det er jo sjældent, han siger noget forkert. Og i den forstand er han jo også et dejligt menneske at have, som kan fastholde og rejse de moralske spørgsmål.
Han er ikke doserende. Han fortæller ikke folk, hvad de skal gøre. Han fortæller heller ikke folk, hvad der er rigtigt eller hvad der er forkert. Men han begynder med dig selv.
Han er politisk realist, han er et kulturelt spændende menneske, og han er altså også livsfilosofisk. Så dejligt opmuntrende at være nærheden af. Altså, han kaster jo virkelig en glæde af sig.
Han repræsenterer noget, som næsten er forsvundet i vores kultur, nemlig forestillingen om en absolut godhed og en absolut uselviskhed. Altså, der er en eller anden kynisme, som har bredt sig i vores samfund. Vi er enhver af sig selv nærmest, og jungleloven og liberalisme og alt det der. Ikke? At forestillingen om moral og etik og uselviskhed, ikke? Det er næsten ikke til at sige de ord, uden at forholde sig ironisk til dem. Der kommer Dalai Lama, tror jeg, og repræsenterer en eller anden gammel grunddrøm hos os, ikke? Altså drømmen om det gode og det onde og alt det der, ikke? Altså den form for orden i tilværelsen, som kommer af en tro på, at der er en vej frem, og der er en vej tilbage, og der er et op, og der er et ned. Altså bare det, at han er en uselvisk politiker, det er næsten fuldstændig selvmodsigende, ikke?
I think the Westerners, or I think non-Buddhists, usually they look more human level. Then you see Tibetan Buddhists, of course they not only just this life, but many other lives also, influence of many other lives. But then you see from the Buddhist viewpoint, of course, even Buddha Shakyamuni also human being. So suddenly you see the Tibetans consider me as a normal human being. But little difference because of, you see, the concept, you see, the connection with the previous lives.
Remember the lines spoken by the chorus in T.S. Eliot's poem, The Rock. Where's the life we have lost in living? Where's the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we have lost in information? Your Holiness, Dalai Lama, the Greek inscription here on the top panel says, in pneumati kai aletheia. Translated into English, this means, in spirit and truth. I can think of no other of our many distinguished visitors who fits this inscription so well. The chair is yours.
Warm-hearted, I feel it's very essential for a happy life. So that's the principle of the moral ethics. Of course, warm-hearted with human intelligence, this must go together. Then our life becoming more meaningful. And especially at the time of death, when we look back, yes, my life now spent meaningful way. Now, no regret. In order to blossom this potential, you see, learning from understanding, from other, that's very essential.
At lytte for at forstå, det er jo utrolig vigtigt for at skabe bevægelse i fastfrosne fronter, ikke? At man dels prøver på at sætte sig ind i, hvorfor siger den anden det, som vedkommende siger. Og når den anden undersøger ens egne forudsætninger og motiver til at have den holdning, som man har, så bliver man jo også klogere på sig selv. Så den bevægelse skaber også en form for intellektuel vækst.
Through education, I think our perceptions can change, our attitude can change. So that's in order to make a contribution regarding peace. The idea of dialogue, spirit of dialogue, I feel is very important to familiarize. So right from the beginning, teach children, the conflict there, then the best way to solve the conflict is through dialogue. So through that way, the student very familiar about the idea of dialogue. So therefore, one day, some of these students, when they find some quarrel in their home between parents, children may say, oh, this is wrong. Oh, dialogue.
Debate is an important discipline in the Tibetan monks' education. They learn rhetoric and the ability to argue their points of view. But even though there are active monasteries today, the education hasn't got the depth and quality it used to have, and still has outside Tibet. This is because the Chinese have made rules for how many hours and in which subjects the monks can be taught. Some monks don't even participate in the classes, but are reduced to doing physical labor and work as custodians in the living museums their monasteries have been turned into. Another important factor is the lack of highly educated lamas. Since the education no longer has the proper quality or depth, there are no new qualified lamas to take over when the old ones die. Still, the Chinese authorities deem it necessary to hold re-education campaigns for the monks. They move from monastery to monastery and hold classes and examinations in communist ideology. These pictures were shot at Drepung Monastery in Lhasa during such a campaign. The idea to force people to think differently is a central part of the Chinese strategy to change the Tibetans' way of living and destroy their culture. Along the same lines, they try to remove the Dalai Lama from the Tibetan hearts and minds by banning his photos. These pictures were taken in the Jokhang Monastery in Lhasa in April 1996. 2 days later in the same monastery, at the same altars, the Dalai Lama pictures are gone. But the same day in Bakor Market, empty frames started appearing as a silent demonstration.
Through that way, no one changed their view, even hardened. So, it isn't a problem. The Chinese side, waste of time. And the other side is more, more disturbances. So, mutual miserable experiences.
At lytte for at forstå, det er det, som vi for eksempel oplever med Dalai Lama, hvor han prøver at sige til kineserne, nu må I lytte for at forstå. Og hvis ikke man lytter til de forskellige toner i verdenskulturen, så vil man ikke forstå nødvendigheden af verdenskulturens mangfoldighed. For hvis man ikke lytter, så lærer man heller ikke noget. Og så lærer man heller ikke at forstå andre, og så får man ikke respekt for andre, og så får vi ikke den verdensfred, vi gerne vil.
One American lady, many years ago, she warned me, science is the killer of religion. So be careful with contact with scientists. But then I felt one of the basic Buddhist sort of attitude, especially in Mahayana Buddhist attitude, you should remain skeptical. And skeptical attitude bring question. Question bring answer. Question carry the investigation. Through investigation or experiment, you find answer. Just to believe sometimes it become obstacle to know the reality.
Det er befriende, at Dalai Lama han kommer og serverer to synspunkter for os. For det første, at man skal være kritisk over for viden, at man skal være skeptisk over for forskningsresultater, og at man skal have tillid til sin egen fornuft og de resultater, som den når frem til.
Freedom of press or media people. I often is telling the media people should have long nose, as long as elephant nose. Then you see smell here, in front. Yes, front usually beauty, usually. But then very important to smell behind. What there? Same smell or something different? That's very important. And make it public. That's the only way to check.
Det er ikke nok, at det er sandt. Det skal også være til gavn for mennesker, uden at skade andre, uden at skade miljøet osv. Og hele den store sammenhæng skal kundskaber tænkes ind i, så at de ikke bliver frakoblet visdommen eller indsigten om, hvad der er godt og hvad der er smukt.
Jeg husker først, da jeg mødte Dalai Lama, og jeg var i audiens, og jeg skulle spille noget klarinet, så havde min klarinet med. Så spurgte han mig, hvor mange timer, hvor mange år var det at lære at spille på sådan en klarinet? Og så ledte jeg sådan efter, hvor længe jeg tror, jeg spillede i 18 år. Og i øjeblikket, jeg sagde 18 år, så forstod jeg, hvad det var, jeg havde svaret på. Det vil sige, uden videre bruger jeg 18 år af mit liv på at lære at spille klarinet. Hvor mange timer af mit liv er jeg parat til at bruge på at blive et ordentligt menneske? 3 kvarter hver morgen, højst. Det er tit den måde, vi prioriterer, når vi snakker om spiritualitet og åndelighed. Det er der, at vi bliver nødt til at forstå, at det er en sindssygt ambitiøst projekt at sætte sig for. At ville ændre på sin moralske habitus, at ændre på sin fremtrædelse her i verden. Men til gengæld bliver man også nødt til at forstå, at det er sindssygt afgørende. Og der bliver man nødt til virkelig at arbejde med sin motivation for at kunne tage en beslutning, der er stærk nok.
Irrespective of what is sort of our life, but all same way we born, same way we grown up under the nourishment, the care of the human affection. We all same. Then eventually we become a little different here and there. Then at the time of death, we all go same way. So between there, whether you say we should be a meaningful life, or constructive life, or destructive life, is up to individual. Unless the human motivation is very sincere, there are always possibility of misuse or corruptions. Therefore, I think main answer for that is spirit of self-discipline. On the basis of awareness, long-term consequences.
The Chinese have taken more than their fair share of Tibet's rich natural resources and have used the vast deserted areas as a dump for nuclear waste. The Tibetan plateau is rich in minerals and metals like uranium, iron, gold and borax. Several places in the country, the Chinese mines have poisoned rivers and dams have left big areas dry. The logging has over the years reached catastrophic proportions. Because many of Asia's major rivers, like the Mekong, Yangtze, the Yellow River, Brahmaputra and Indus, have their sources in Tibet, the deforestation has direct consequences for many countries in the shape of landslides and flooding. But according to the experts, the deforestation may have even wider consequences because the winds which control the monsoon and influence phenomena like El Niño originate on the Tibetan plateau and are affected by the lack of vegetation.
The Tibetan environment is something very delicate because of high altitude and dry climate. If it's a Tibetan environment is damaged or nature balance is much disturbed, then
you see, the effect will reach millions of people or billions of people.
Farming at 9,000 feet above sea level takes specialized methods and crops adjusted to the difficult climate. Through the centuries, the Tibetans have lived on milk and meat from yaks, and the most important crop, barley. The farming in Tibet has always been sustainable without any use of artificial fertilizers and with enough yield to feed the population. But the massive influx of Chinese has created a need for more and different crops. The Chinese prefer wheat and have created large intensive farms. But the wheat doesn't do so well in the tough climate and needs large doses of fertilizer. And since the topsoil is thin, leftover fertilizer seeps into the rivers and further down into the Southeast Asian region.
We need material development. And also, you see, have to use or have to take the mines, natural resources, including mines, different sort of minerals. But we have to take, you see, these in such a way, the minimum damage about the environment.
Vores tekniske forhold til naturen er jo sådan et beherskelsesinstrument, hvis konsekvenser kun langsomt er ved at gå op for os. Hvor vi stiller os over naturen, udenfor overnaturen. Mennesker, i moderne vestlige mennesker, anser ikke sig selv for at være naturvæsener, men for at stå udenfor overnaturen, som man har en vis ret til at beherske, fordi naturen er til for menneskers skyld.
This is a question of future survival. I think my generation, I think okay. Now next 40-50 years, I think okay. There is another generation, 100 years, maybe okay. But then after that, if you see carelessness continuously, then really I think we're going to disaster. In some cases, we, human beings, I think, too much sort of emphasis importance of individual diversity, nationality or religious faith or the system or economic background or education background. Sometimes we forget about the basic, our oneness and our common goal. The diversity, important, but the common interest altogether. That's the proper way. Like so like 5 fingers. 5 fingers, you see, each have some unique things. Now, example, you see this finger, small one, compare this, very weak, but digging ear. This is much useful. This you cannot do. So each have, you see, they are unique, sort of unique things. Maintain different unique things. In some cases, all work together. So that's the way. More we, through education, through experience, once we come closer to the reality, then the basis of solidarity clearly there.
From Africa? Which country? Which country? Africa? Yes. From Somalia. Somalia. Oh.
The Danish government maintained that the Dalai Lama wasn't a head of state and kept out of the visit. But the chairmanship of the Danish parliament invited him to an informal dialogue.
Yeah.
Afterwards, the Tibet support group had arranged for a meeting with members of parliament, the press, and invited guests. Here, His Holiness was given the opportunity to express his view on the situation in Tibet.
I always feel, we Tibetan, when we're passing through difficult period, the Tibetan cultural heritage is really useful to keep our peace of mind.
and determination. And then also the Tibetan cultural heritage develop peaceful relation with environment, peaceful relation with animal, peaceful relation with fellow human being. So that is something really worthwhile to preserve.
During the years following the occupation, Tibet and the Tibetans went through unspeakable sufferings. Before the occupation, there were more than 6,000 monasteries and nunneries, and more than 500,000 monks and nuns. Before and during the Cultural Revolution, all monasteries, temples, and sacred places were systematically destroyed, together with large numbers of cultural relics like statues and scriptures. Many were more than 1,000 years old. When the Cultural Revolution was over, there were 8 open monasteries, and not a single monk or nun in the traditional robes. Many were killed, others thrown into jail had escaped or disguised themselves as ordinary citizens. Most of Tibet's cultural heritage had been destroyed. According to estimates by the government in exile, more than 1 million Tibetans died as a direct result of the Chinese occupation. Around 100,000 were tortured to death. Before the occupation, Tibet, as opposed to China, had a balanced population growth. But the Chinese created restrictions on childbirth and forcefully sterilized many women, which resulted in a decrease in the Tibetan population. Through the 1980s, the Chinese eased their grip on the Tibetans' freedom a little and allowed several monasteries and nunneries to reopen from the ruins. Today, there are about 50,000 active monks and nuns in Tibet. But the Tibetan culture and people are still living under the threat of drowning in a huge sea of Chinese. The Dalai Lama made the little mountain town Dharamsala home for himself, the government in exile, and many of the Tibetan refugees. Here and in the settlements in South India, they have recreated many of Tibet's most important monasteries and other institutions. The 10th of March is the anniversary for the Chinese takeover of Tibet, and in Dharamsala, the day is commemorated by Tibet's friends and the hosts of the exiled community.
What happens in Tibet has enormous effect in Asia, obviously. Strategically, Tibet was always the center of Asia, commanded the high plateau, and as long as that high plateau was inhabited by peaceful, demilitarized people, these great other empires around it had a buffer zone. That buffer zone is no longer there. And we find that all the borders around Tibet, whether it's in the Islam countries to the west of Tibet, whether it's the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, whatever incarnation that may be to the north, China to the east, and the Indian subcontinent, these great empires find themselves in a very precarious situation right now, and have for the last 40 years. And obviously that has an effect on the whole world. Nuclear weapons in China, on the border of India, are a threat not only to India, but the rest of the world. The fact of nuclear bases in Tibet, run by Chinese, is a threat to the world. Nuclear waste being dumped in Tibet is a threat to the world.
Tibet today. On the square in front of Patala in Lhasa, local schools, cultural groups and the army are rehearsing for the grand parade which will mark the 50th anniversary of what the Chinese Communist Party and the local government call the peaceful liberation of Tibet. China's Vice President Hu Jintao participates in the celebrations. The anniversary is seen as a significant symbol of the Chinese Communist Party's power and right to be in Tibet. In the official speeches they say, "We will never let Tibet split from the great family of the motherland, and will also never allow Tibet to remain backward."
Kina har jo en grusom forhistorie med et rige, der ikke hang sammen med det, der hedder warlords, som bekæmpede hinanden, og ofrene var befolkningen, når de rullede hen over områderne. Og der frygter de, at hvis man tillader tibetanerne at lave deres uafhængige stat, så er der altså mange minoriteter, som kan forlange uafhængighed. Og så frygter de, at riget så bryder sammen. Og der begår de nok en historisk fejl. Alle store riger, som har varet længe, har accepteret kulturernes mangfoldighed. De har accepteret, at der er mange forskellige religioner i riget, og mange forskellige måder at tro på, at forholde sig på, at leve på.
We are same human being. We all have the same sort of right. I think reality now telling us how often you are same human being. You all share one small planet.
One, I think, serious matter, that is the gap, rich and poor. This is very serious. The northerner and southerner. You see, the northerner, you see, you have such, high living standard, and you have surplus things. But the southerners, they also human beings, human brothers, sisters, and also live on the same planet, but even basic necessity is not sufficient, and many people you see facing starvation. I think the one contribution that made their own by themselves, and their leaders, they spend more money on weapons. If they spend for improvement of the agriculture and water, sort of dam, but things like that, I think the situation can be less serious. This is a huge gap, rich and poor. Now this not only morally wrong, but practically also source of problem. Well, that's very unfortunate. So, you see, to those poor people, how can, you see, we taught them the importance of compassion? Difficult. Surrounding something with a huge building and luxury sort of way of life, lifestyle, and then they are facing even one meal a day difficulties, then very difficult, very difficult.
Solidaritet betyder, at du forstår, at vi er hinandens vilkår. Vi er hinandens vilkår. Det jeg gør mod dig, det gør jeg mod mig. Det du gør mod dig, det gør du mod mig. Det du gør mod mig. Så vi er hinandens vilkår, det hænger sammen. Det er fuldstændig afgørende. Processen at gå fra egocentreringen, væk fra egocentrering, det er jo netop at gå ud i en solidaritet.
Hvis man gerne selv vil være lykkelig, så må man også tænke lidt på andre menneskers behov for lykke. Ellers sker der jo ikke noget. Og man kan jo netop ikke opnå sin egen lykke udelukkende ved egne kræfter. Det kræver et samspil med andre mennesker.
In order to receive human affection from others, first, you yourself must create the atmosphere. Sometimes, you see, we want others' affection to oneself, but oneself, you see, don't care about affection towards others. That's wrong calculation. The human affection is something like, the basis of our survival. I think the word compassion seems not complete. I think more like sense of caring. Sense of caring you can apply to both caring to myself. And then that is a caring, sense of caring, extend to others. Basic human nature is gentleness, more affectionate. But some people say human nature is aggressive. Human nature is more negative. If human nature is truly negative, then very difficult. But I don't think that. The human nature, I believe, positive.
Vi deler vel alle på en eller anden måde drømmen om Tibet som Shangri-La. Dette rige af skønhed og fred, befolket af kloge, dybsindige lamaer. Og den kan jo være nok så smuk, men jeg er bange for, at vi kommer til at svigte de reelt eksisterende tibetaneres menneskerettigheder i den myte, som slet ikke har noget som helst at gøre med virkeligheden.
Like any other occupying power, the Chinese started with improving the infrastructure. They built roads and an airport where many tourists pass through yearly, and which have also made it possible to move large numbers of Chinese to Tibet. It is estimated that 70% of the population in the capital Lhasa is Chinese. Tibet, together with other Western provinces, has been chosen as a special area for economic growth. And with a new railroad planned and a growing economy, the numbers of resident Chinese is estimated to increase by 30% in the coming years. Following the many soldiers and other Chinese comes a whole entertainment industry. Everywhere in Lhasa, there are karaoke bars, discos, and prostitutes, and the trades providing services to them. On a single road of about half a mile, you can count up to 35 bars. A typical example of the development is Jarmalinka, which lies in the Kichu River south of Lhasa. The island used to be the Tibetans' favorite picnic spot, home for the yearly bathing festival and the place where many pilgrims pitched their tents when visiting the city. Today, the Chinese have turned it into a party palace with casinos and bars, where very few Tibetans have access. Tibet is especially popular among Chinese couples on their honeymoon. The Chinese image of the Tibetan folklore means that even the Tibetans' holiest sites like Potala and Jokang have been turned into superficial tourist attractions. The tourism is one of the biggest growth areas for Tibet, and the main target group is rich foreign tourists who pay a lot of money to experience the country's unique culture. This has taken a certain degree of restoration, which often has been paid by the Tibetans themselves through collections and donations to the monasteries. But since the Chinese mainly regard the monasteries as tourist attractions, which have to remain open as much as possible, the work isn't properly carried out, and the results catastrophic. Large wooden beams haven't been allowed to dry, and subsequently crack. This affects the walls, where centuries-old murals are breaking off. The earth-stamped floors aren't made according to proper methods, and water seeps into the rooms below. The monasteries, which have survived for more than 1,000 years, are now falling apart. The old buildings in Lhasa are also being torn down one by one and replaced with Chinese architecture in poor concrete, which can't survive in the tough Tibetan climate and decay even before they are finished. The Tibetans are forced by economic or other means to move to large housing areas on the outskirts of the city, while the Chinese take over the houses in the center. The new houses the Tibetans are moved to are often of a poorer standard, with less room, less electricity, and less water.
This, you see, neither good for China nor to Tibetan. We suffer much. And whether it's a Tibetan culture, heritage, and Buddhism, whether intentionally or unintentionally facing some kind of culture genocide, it is very serious.
Hard-pressed, the Tibetans are escaping from a life often without a future, with poverty and political oppression and persecution. Many come from the northern and eastern regions and pass through Lhasa, where middlemen arrange their escape. Among the refugees, there are a lot of children whose parents leave them to an unknown fate in the hope that they can get a future in India under the protection of the Dalai Lama. The road to the Dalai Lama most often goes from Lhasa through Nepal and on to India. One of the most commonly used routes is by truck to Tingri on the highway to the Nepalese border. From here they move on foot at night towards the Nagpala Pass, which is situated at almost 18,000 feet at the foot of the world's highest mountains, Mount Everest and Choyu. Even during optimum conditions and with proper equipment, it is a very dangerous journey. But in a combination of poverty and ignorance, many refugees undertake the journey wearing thin jackets, sneakers, and with insufficient supplies. The weather can change quickly, and many have been stuck at the pass in a snowstorm for several days. There are no estimates of how many Tibetans die during an escape, but for those who survive, the price is often severe frostbite. On the other side of the Nepalese border, in Solukhumbu, is the hospital in Kunde. Here, the New Zealand doctors treat many of the most severe cases of frostbite. When the refugees reach Nepal's capital, Kathmandu, they are often gathered at the reception center, where they are registered and interviewed. Here, they talk openly about intolerable living conditions inside Tibet and the dream to see the Dalai Lama. From Kathmandu, they are sent on to Delhi by bus, and from there on to Dharamsala, or one of the settlements in South India. Children and youths are sent to school, but for many adults who can't speak anything but Tibetan, there are few options for getting work. And after months or a few years, some choose to return to Tibet.
I de seneste år er undertrykkelsen jo ikke dæmpet. Den er snarere taget til, og så vidt man ved, er der flere politiske fanger nu end for få år siden. Så jeg tror nok, man vil se en fremtid, hvor den tibetanske kultur vil blive stadig mere reduceret til turistattraktioner.
Perhaps I think, according to their illusion, they gain sort of upper hand. That kind of, I think, the miscalculation, I think, last 50 years, many occasions that happened. But truth always remains truth. Reality always remains reality. One Tibetan monk, as I know, that monk, before 59, we know very well. Then he told me, during his period in Chinese Gulag, he faced few occasions, some danger. Then I thought, oh, danger on his life, maybe. Then I asked, what kind of danger? Then he replied to me, danger of losing compassion towards Chinese. It's something good, isn't it?
The Dalai Lama institution is based on a principle of rebirth. When a Dalai Lama dies, his duties are taken over by a regent until his reincarnation has been found and is ready to take over. His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso is the 14th Dalai Lama. Following the occupation, he has become a strong and unifying symbol of the free and independent Tibet for the couple of 100,000 Tibetans living in exile around the world, and not least for those still living inside Tibet.
At Dharamsala, at my place, I always feeding birds. And in fact, within the compound, if you look, you see, many birds seems to be more fat. So occasionally, how come? Suddenly, and then catch some of these birds. Then I lost my temper. So therefore, you see, I kept one air rifle. Of course, not killing, but when you say hawk, you say come there. One side you say my brain want to shoot, but from one side, oh, I'm monk, should not kill.
Our future very much lies on peace. As a peace give us a meaningful life, happy life. Peace means happiness. War means destruction, killing. The worst thing in modern warfare, once is a violence in war. War means, I think, the large-scale, mobilized violence. That is war. So, say, in modern time, a lot of the destructive power. So the suffering is immense. And also, innocent people, I think, suffer a lot. Tibetan Thugger is competition between the power of truth and the power of gun.
Kina frygter som pesten opløsning af riget, og det kan man godt forstå. Det får dem så til at undertrykke på en unødig brutal måde, og lave en undertrykkelse, som overhovedet ikke havde været nødvendig, Fordi Tibet ville jo ikke drømme om at true Kina.
Now, obviously, any sensible person can see very clearly the stability and the unity under God is artificial. Genuine stability and unity must come voluntarily. So the more suppression, more resentment. So the moment the superficial sort of stability, calm, that is essentially, it's a very superficial. Underneath, they're ready to explode.
In Dharamsala, the Tibetans can freely demonstrate against the oppression in their homeland, like every year on the 10th of March. This freedom is denied the Tibetans inside Tibet. Journalists are not allowed to visit Tibet, so all footage in this film has been shot by people traveling as tourists. The secret Chinese police, Public Security Bureau, keep a close watch on both tourists and the population through video cameras and plainclothes policemen in the Tibetan areas and estates. After 50 years of occupation, rebellion is still lurking among the Tibetans under the surface. Most manifestations of their dissatisfaction are in the shape of civil disobedience. In 1999, a Tibetan managed to remove the Chinese flag in front of Patala. He was arrested before he managed to raise the Tibetan flag and died after a few months in prison. Because of world opinion, it is important for the Chinese to create an impression of peace and stability, which is why they deny the bombs which have exploded and damaged some of the most hated Chinese monuments.
Hvis Kina ønsker en løsning, så vil han jo være en betydningsfuld del af det. Han er klarhjernet, han er realistisk, samtidig med at han er en religiøs figur. Så han kan både, altså religiøse figurer kan ofte være fanatikere, ikke? De kan jo stemme folk op til fanatisme med deres religiøse budskaber. Det er jo, hvad vi oplever andre steder i verden. Her oplever du altså en religiøs leder, som dæmper sit folk ned, og som kommer med et fredsforslag, som logisk set jo burde være acceptabelt for kineserne.
The Dalai Lama has often stressed that Tibet never gave up independence, despite close relations with neighboring countries like Mongolia and China. But the realities forced him to publish the so-called 5-point peace plan in 1987. It is based on autonomy within an independent but not a free Tibet. The 5 points of the plan are the following.
Kineserne afleverer jo ikke et gram jord, hvis de følger Dalai Lamas fredsforslag. Han bryder ikke det kinesiske rige op. Altså, mange andre tibetanske ledere ville da vel formentlig have sagt et uafhængigt Tibet. Ikke? Uafhængigt Tibet. Free Tibet now. Men det er jo ikke hans budskab. Hans budskab er et åndeligt, kulturelt, religiøst uafhængigt Tibet.
If you think of the situation properly, analyze properly, then the finding mutually agreeable solution is something mutual benefit.
Dalai Lamas tilbud er jo i virkeligheden et generøst, som han jo også selv siger, et generøst tilbud til kineserne om at være med til at redde Kina. Fordi ved at lære kineserne at respektere kulturernes og religionernes mangfoldighed, så gør han det muligt for Kina at hænge sammen længe som et rige, i stedet for at have konflikter på konflikter, som popper op rundt omkring riget.
Jeg kan ikke finde nogen paralleller til i verden et folk, der har så bred støtte blandt kunstnere, blandt almindelige mennesker, i medier og også verbalt fra politikere, men så ringe reel politisk støtte.
After first refusing, the Danish Prime Minister Paul Nyrup bowed to heavy pressure and met with the Dalai Lama. They spoke for 45 minutes before the Dalai Lama left for Norway.
I hvert fald synes de vestlige politikere også, og ligge under for myten, men de vil ikke have noget at gøre med de politiske realiteter. Men det er som om, man kan håndtere ham som repræsentant for vores fælles myte, men ikke som repræsentant for et reelt eksisterende undertrykt folk.
Er Tibet en del af Kina?
Ja, det er den danske regerings klare udenrigspolitik, og har været det siden vi anerkendte Kina for 50 år siden.
Den vestlige verden har jo vist, at kineserne kunne få lov til at tage Tibet uden de store protester. Det moralske nederlag i forhold til det er indkasseret. Jeg siger ikke, at man skal gribe til våben imod kineserne. Det vil på mange måder være absurd, men jeg mener nok en klar politisk støtte til et folk, hvis menneskerettigheder trædes under fod, er en klar forpligtelse.
China, you see, very much concerned about their image, the outside world, and also their economy development. So therefore, the world opinion, sooner or later, they have to think about world opinion. It is very, very essential. You see, the outside world, our friend, you see, from time to time, should express your concern, your sort of disagree with the Chinese injustice, so that eventually the Chinese government will realize the issue of Tibet not go away. Even if some nation want to send army or aeroplane, bomber, we would not invite or welcome such things. So our goal maybe is very sort of noble, a very good one, but then you see, if our method is take wrong sort of wrong method, for example, the bloodshed or violence, then because of that method we follow, the very noble goal, some kind of become meaningless. Now, as is a globalization or something is the modern economy, no national boundary. You see, your neighbor's interest is your own interest. In reality, you see, there is no independent or separate interest, ours and theirs. So under that circumstances, you see, destruction of your neighbor is destruction of yourself. That's the reality. This is very important. I often call or describe 20th century, whether we like it or not, that century become like century of violence, century of bloodshed. Now this 21st century should be century of dialogue. So problem there, conflict there. So long human beings remain there, conflict always there. So this is the basic thing. Once we promote the spirit of dialogue, in the spirit of the reconciliation, a more realistic way approach towards problem, then we don't need these weapons. Perhaps I think only need sharp mind or the
sharp mind and sharp tongue.
Otherwise, no need sharp weapons now. No need weapons. Every human being wants happiness, wants to be successful, wants happy, calm mind, wants sort of, I think, good sleep or peaceful sleep, sort of good health. If you want that, the key factor is warm heart. Your health improves, your sleep without disturbances, even your dreams more happy, no nightmare. If it's daytime, too much thinking about how to cheat others, then in dream I think other people cheat you. So more anxiety, more worry, more fear. So daytime remain warm-hearted sort of person. And certainly, if your motivation is something sincere, then you can conduct every activities truthfully. truthfully, openly, then there is nothing left, you see, to develop fear.
Det han siger på forfærdeligt mange måder, det kan I ikke opføre jer ordentligt. Det er det, han siger på et hav af forskellige måder. Og jeg vil sige, forestillingen om, at man rent faktisk kan ændre på sig selv, at man har mulighed for at gøre en forskel, altså at det er muligt at opdrage sig selv og sine børn og sine omgivelser, men først og fremmest at opdrage sig selv fra en uetisk opførsel til en etisk opførsel, fra en fundamental egocentrering og egoisme til det modsatte, måske i sidste ende nu helt frem til det, der hedder uselviskhed, hvor du er vigtigere for mig, end jeg er for mig.
Buddhisten og den kristne vi søger begge den indre fred. For det er inde i os selv, at vi finder Gud.
Det gjorde et fantastisk indtryk for mig at se en kristen præst i fuld ornat i kirken sige, med brændende troværdighed i blikket til Dalai Lama, at du er lys i mørket, som kan vise os nogle ting, vi har glemt.
If we believe the Christian faith, then of course the thing about is God. I think the genuine meaning of love to God is you must show genuine love towards your fellow human being.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Kærlighed, når man forstår ordet kærlighed, sådan som jeg tror, Dalai Lama forstår ordet kærlighed, så er det en form for omsorg for næsten. Du kan sige, at gå fra selvcentreringen, jeg er det vigtigste i verden, til omgivelserne er det vigtigste i verden. Det kan kun lade sig gøre i og med, at kærligheden optræder, fordi der kan du slet ikke lade være. Fordi du kan simpelthen se konsekvenserne af dine handlinger hos de andre. Og du kan ikke holde ud af at forestille dig, at de andre skal bære konsekvenserne af dine handlinger, at de skal have bære lidelsen af dine handlinger.
Because if we respect others' life or others' right, then we cannot pursue stubbornly, ignore others' right or others' welfare or others' future. While we are pursuing our own goal, we must keep others' interest in our mind. The power of truth always remains. Sometimes better awareness, then is the power of truth even increasing. The power of gun, power of force. Time goes, it becomes weaker and weaker, weaker. Peace means happiness. War means destruction, killing. Peace means happiness. War means destruction, killing. So, what do you think?